Oh goody, more Katara practicing waterbending. My favorite. But hey, she's actually struggling with the water whip. I remember that from the original. Kinda weird that she's struggling at all, considering everything we've learned up until this point about bending. But hey, at least they're trying. I was asking for a struggle last episode, even if this is coming out of nowhere. In the original show, Katara had some entirely self-taught basics learned, but when she wanted to take that next step into learning actual forms, she struggled with it. This made a lot of sense. It's kind of like how anyone can teach themselves how to fight with basic punches and stuff, but once you want to learn an actual martial art, there's a lot more of a learning curve to it. Live action Katara hasn't really been having that issue until now with the water whip specifically, which seems a lot more arbitrary. Especially since we saw her practicing with the scroll last episode with no issues at all, but whatever. Oh wait, here comes Aang to give another platitude. Reach inside and feel the water whip inside you. Got it, 10-4, buddy. What Aang says here sounds basically nothing like bending teaching, and way more like the Force. You have to look inside yourself, feel the energy, tap into your feelings, find a place where your spirit is blah 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 blah. It's not to say there wasn't a mental aspect to bending. That was pretty much the entire point of not only bitter work, but also the deserter. Earthbending required stubbornness, lightning required peace of mind, and firebending in general required restraint. But this is so vague and, once again, generally applies to all forms of bending. Aang should be basically no help here because he's an airbender. He doesn't know how waterbending works, what mental state you need to be in, or anything like that. Otherwise, he'd be waterbending right now. His advice might be helpful to another airbender, but, you know. So it turns out that Katara's mental block is coming from her whole past trauma with her mom dying and all that. So that just didn't affect her at all beforehand then? Only when learning arbitrarily advanced bending techniques will your past traumas actually begin to affect you, and it has nothing to do with skill expression as a martial art whatsoever. Maybe they're trying to do something like lightning bending, where Zuko wasn't able to do it because of his inner turmoil, but Iroh had just explained that lightning bending specifically required peace of mind, being nicknamed the cold-blooded fire.
Oh yeah, good point.
And lightning is so completely removed from fire, and so much more powerful and lethal, that for general balance reasons, it's absolutely reasonable to have some kind of limitation on it. God damn it! I don't think the water whip is quite on the same level as being able to shoot lightning from your fingertips. Having that same logic apply to all but the most basic of bending specifically for exactly this one instance and then never again seems kinda silly. Especially when it doesn't really seem to apply anywhere else. Certainly not to Aang. I don't even think he's gotten over that stupid training flashback from last episode, and he's definitely not over his people being genocided. But his bending never seems to be affected by his traumas, and he is still a master. By the way, how are you doing over there, Zuko? That's great, buddy. So yeah, this is dumb, and it's once again not even being used as an excuse to get Aang to waterbend, even though this would once again be a decent opportunity to throw that in there. Especially now that we've got a much earlier ticking clock and we're doing the whole thing with the water whip, giving us yet another analog to the episode where Aang learns waterbending, which will have nothing to do with Aang learning waterbending. Getting him to learn after this is going to be a bit difficult when the rest of the episode looks like this. Also, something that aggravates me in this scene is that Aang tries to lighten the mood with a joke, which, the delivery is a little clunky, but whatever, credit for trying. And Katara, as is her defining character trait, stands there, thinking and saying nothing, until Aang reminds us that we're going to the North Pole. I guess Katara is just really looking forward to training with master waterbenders more than she's interested in hanging out with her friend. But you know what? Sure, that's the character we're going for here. She's a bit stiff and humorless, but she's being diligent and she's eager to train. She's going to learn from the masters. I wonder why I'm highlighting this so much. Oh, Aang gets no laughs, but Sokka and Momo carrying some fruits gets a smile. I see how it is. You guys are so good at writing chemistry. They really only seem to want Katara to interact with Sokka unless it involves talking about bending. Like they're the ones who are supposed to be developing a bond when they're siblings and they're already supposed to have that. Like that's happening in this next scene where they're flying around talking about how cool Suki was. Then, all of a sudden, as they're flying on Appa, Aang spots what looks like another airbender flying through the sky towards that mountain.
That's no mountain.
That's a Washu!
Wait, what? Isn't the city carved out of a mountain? Whatever. Also, Aang finally says yip yip, and wait a minute. Aang never said yip yip up until this point, which he did immediately in the original when he wanted to get Appa to fly. So how did Sokka and Katara know how to get Appa flying in the first episode? What, did up, ascend, elevate actually work this time? They didn't have the bison whistle either. Aang still had that on him when he was imprisoned on the ship, I guess. This means he could have called Appa anytime he wanted, which actually might have been one way to get Appa airborne without Sokka and Katara knowing about the whole yip yip thing, but I guess the writers really wanted to keep the funny Gilligan cut. How many new fucking problems am I gonna find with the first episode? And now it's time for Zuko and Zhao, my favorite power couple. It's worth noting that the primary episodes that this episode is adapting are the King of Omashu, Jet, the Northern Air Temple, and a secret fourth episode that I'll get to eventually. All of which were episodes that neither Zuko nor Zhao had any presence in whatsoever. All those episodes basically had their own villain of the week, two of them being the titular characters mentioned before it was revealed that Bumi was just messing with Aang the whole time in his episode, and then the Northern Air Temple had the evil Fire Nation dude who was exploiting the Mechanist. So not only is this episode overstuffed with plots as it stands, but now we need to basically invent new Zuko and Zhao scenes on top of the Azula scenes we're now also cramming in there. Is it any wonder our main characters have no chemistry and barely any discernible personality traits? There's just no fucking room for it. Anyway, they're hunting for Aang, and even though this is Netflix and people can just binge the show, which is what they want you to do anyway, we have to remind the audience that Zuko really wants to keep Aang's return a secret by having Zhao suggest informing some of his troops about his general vicinity. Even though the cat is so out of the bag at this point that random Fire Nation insurgents know of his return. Why are we still even bothering with this plot point anymore? I'm so tired. Zuko does relent in allowing Zhao to tell some of his men, and honestly, I'm still utterly perplexed by this pairing, especially with the idea that Zuko wants to keep Aang a secret. How is Zhao, as an individual without military forces at his disposal, actually going to be of any help to Zuko? Assuming that's what he genuinely thinks Zhao will provide. So if you invite Zhao, then having his forces at your disposal is kind of the whole point of doing so with him being a commander of multiple people and vessels, is it not? And if you're just keeping Zhao by your side to keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't go capturing the Avatar under your nose, then isn't this the worst fucking idea ever because that's what his loyal forces are going to do for him? If they're actually being as smart as they can be about the situation, which I still can't fucking tell if they know they're being very obviously used and deceived here, then they should be keeping him on the shortest leash possible. Aang will be discovered by other Fire Nation forces outside of their control if he goes too far north? Yeah, well, he'll be found out by Zhao's forces right the fuck now if you let him do this. Basically, I'm confused because Zhao's forces helping should either be a foregone conclusion or else the last thing they want to do. And the fact that we're having this discussion ending with Zuko allowing this at all just makes me confused on what everyone's motivation is. Okay, so then Zhao leaves to go to his ship. So he does still have one, and I guess they really just don't want to show the set for it. And G comes in mentioning that he was on the ship and talked to some of Zhao's crew, and apparently Zhao failed his officer training 3 times? Why are we characterizing Zhao as being completely fucking incompetent? When Zhao in the original show was only as much of a threat as he was because he was actually very fucking competent? Let's circle back around to that Zhao comment I got, because Kiro here does a great job at breaking down what ends up working about Zhao's character. If Zuko is the Saturday morning cartoon Team Rocket style nemesis, then Zhao is the actual threat who will get the job done. Which, by the way, he does in the Blue Spirit, and at the Northern Water Tribe. Zuko only ever managed to capture Aang when he willingly went along with him, or when he was completely unconscious. And even then, as soon as he was awake, the pendulum swung back in Aang's favor with both hands tied behind his back. Should've used some of that quality rub to make a gag, Zuko. Zhao recruiting the Yuyan archers was all the edge he needed to finally capture Aang. Even if Sokka and Katara were present with him at the time, they would have been no help whatsoever against such an imposing threat. The only mistake he made was not accounting for that which he could not have possibly accounted for in regards to the appearance of the Blue Spirit. And even then, he was extremely cautious, having every cart searched on the way into the compound, and keeping Aang heavily guarded and restrained. Zhao was one desperate prince away from winning the entire war for the Fire Nation right then and there. Not to mention his entire plan to take over the North Pole and kill the Moon Spirit actually fucking worked. Again, his only mistake was not accounting for the completely unaccountable. If he had known Yue had some Moon Spirit in her, you can bet your ass she'd be next on the grill. And it took the spirit of the vengeful ocean itself to finally bring him down, something no one could possibly hope to overcome. Zhao was rarely shown as being incompetent through his own faults. The Deserter is the primary example of this happening, where his uncontrolled fury causes him to burn down his own boats. But that same fury is what made him a threat to begin with. Hell, even in this interaction, he still manages to get some hits in on Aang. Oh, by the way, a lot of the competent stuff he does in the original show, getting promoted to Admiral, capturing and containing Aang, invading the North and killing the Moon, yeah, he still does that. And they cut out the Deserter altogether, so we don't even get to see his biggest moment of actual incompetence displayed. Hell, we don't even get to see him lose his Agni Kai against Zuko. So you're telling me that Zhao is a fucking imbecile who failed his training multiple times, presents himself like a shitty comedian in every scene he's in, and runs away at the first sign of danger on Kyoshi Island while having him do almost everything the actually competent Zhao did in the original series anyway? Why? Why would you ever want to do something like that? Simple. To prop up Azula, who is actually the competent mastermind behind Zhao's success. Because, you know, if there's any Avatar villain who ever needed any more screen time in propping up, it was Azula. Something I've noticed in the general Avatar fandom is there are people who just don't really care for Zhao at all. Like, he's this joke throwaway character who doesn't matter at all. And I think it's just because he doesn't have the depth and nuance that a lot of the show's other Fire Nation characters have. Even Ozai, I would argue, has a lot more going on than Zhao. But his purpose in the narrative is one that was extremely well fulfilled. He didn't need to have a lot of depth because he did his job as an antagonistic force to both Zuko and Aang. But what we've just been told doesn't give Zhao any depth that we were missing anyway. It just makes him seem like even more of an unthreatening buffoon than he already was, which just makes us wonder why he's even here in the first place. Okay, there's this old-ass, completely obscure piece of Avatar lore that's been long deleted for years, saying that Zhao's promotions may not have been entirely earned through legitimate means due to his shifty nature. But I sincerely doubt that the writers of this disaster combed through old archives from the defunct Nickelodeon website pages to extrapolate further on this one detail of Zhao's past because they decided that Zhao being a moron took priority over giving Katara any character traits to speak of. I also find it kind of hilarious that this is just something G mentions overhearing from Zhao's crew. Like, this is just something they talk about casually regarding their own commander. Loose lips on these Fire Nation ships, man, let me tell you. I remember when Fire Nation soldiers used to actually be people and not simply vessels for exposition. Zuko then gets really pissed at G because gossiping about a superior officer is dishonorable or whatever. We'll get into Zuko's totally borked honor system soon. This is just one such example of it. Okay, so we're coming up on the gates of Omashu. Aang says the city was carved out of a mountain, so the That's No Mountain line from earlier is just even more silly now. Did they just want to do a Star Wars reference? I don't know. He also talks about Omashu's unique delivery system, but doesn't mention anything about riding it with Bumi. I'm not mentioning this for any particular reason. Sokka and Katara react to literally nothing he says. They run into this mysterious fellow, it's Jet by the way, who says that Omashu doesn't welcome outsiders, and suddenly the neurons in Katara's brain activate, and for the first time in the scene she's allowed to speak. See, Katara is allowed to be romantically interested in this one, because well, I'm sure Katara's romance-centric episodes won't get any weirder from here. Oh my god. So Jet sneaks them into the city. Sokka scoffs as Jet flirts with Katara as if Sokka didn't just have the most cringe-ass romance I've ever seen in my entire life. Maybe he's just jealous of Jet stealing away his woman. You know what? I really need to save the incest jokes for next episode. Jet exposes that Omashu is one of the last places untouched by the Fire Nation, which, for one, should be obvious because, duh, there's no fucking Fire Nation here. And for two, is blatantly untrue, but boy oh boy, we'll get there. Katara asks how Jet knows they're not a threat, and he says,
"Just the feeling?"
Oh yeah, that sounds like Jet.
We were relying on instincts.
You'll get yourself killed doing that.
Also, once the guards start questioning them, Katara is noticeably bad at improv when that was like a character trait she used to have. She was really good at rolling with the punches even when she was given absolute garbage to work with.
Hi, June Pippin Paddleopsicopoulos. Nice to meet you.
I mean, that trait didn't come up a lot, but it was at least consistent and funny. Of course, this Katara isn't allowed to have character traits because it would probably be sexist or whatever. I love how this show writes women so fucking much, dude.